Thanks, Alex. So good evening. I'm Annie. I'm the International Photography Curator here at NGS. And it is my distinct pleasure tonight to welcome Christelle Lebas for the Scottish Society for the History of Photography Annual Photographers Lecture. Born in France, Christelle Lebas currently lives and works in London. Having studied in Paris, she obtained her Master's in Photography from the Royal College of Art, London, and currently teaches at the University of the Arts, Camberwell, in Chelsea, and the American International University, also in London. A noted landscape photographer who has sought out remote areas all over Europe, her work touches on the complexities of environmental change and human impact on nature. Her photographs are represented in numerous collections around the world, including those of the V&A in London, the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris, and here at the National Galleries of Scotland. She has published several books, including Between Dog and Dark from 2003, and L'Espace-Temps, Time and Space from 2004. In December of 2016, Christelle opened her monographic exhibition regarding nature at the Huis Marseille, Amsterdam. The accompanying book, Field Studies, Walking Through Landscapes and Archives, was published at the same time and went on to win the prestigious Krasna Kraus Book Award in 2018. The book explored the archive of the botanist and ecologist Sir Edward James Salisbury, which is held at the Natural History Museum in London, and consists of a collection of more than 1,400 photographs, that's original glass plate negatives, silver gelatin prints, and field notes of the places that he visited around the British Isles. The archive had remained largely untouched at the museum until 2011, when Christelle, along with Mark Spence, curator of the British and Irish Herbarium at the museum, started to jointly trace the important collection. In revisiting the original sites documented by Salisbury, Christelle offers a contemporary account that effectively records 90 years of environmental changes. Now, it was through this work that I first met Christelle some 5 years ago, and I had not long started at NGS, and she happened to be on one of her many trips to Scotland researching Salisbury. And from that first meeting, I think it's fair to say I was smitten, both with her and with her work. Among the photographs she showed me were several locations in Scotland, including Arrochar, somewhere I had actually spent many a day in the past as someone who's from the west coast of Scotland. But in the hands of Christelle, it sounded, and she has a wonderful way of pronouncing it, and it looked so transportive and mesmerising. And for me, this sort of sums up the power of her photography, to take something that we know well, maybe even that we take for granted or that we overlook, and this, our natural environment, through her depiction, we are able to see it all anew. But it's not just about recognising the beautiful and the familiar or the overlooked. These photographs are also a wake-up call for environmental action. Last year, when I interviewed Christelle for the Shop Journal Studies, in talking about the Salisbury Archive, she stated, "It made me understand what ecology is. Maybe now I'm not walking the landscape as a wanderer. I am more aware that it has a history that has been influenced by man, animals, and climate." Those words could very easily be applied to our viewing of Christelle's work. We need photographers like her to help us from our wanderings become more aware. Please join me now in welcoming Christelle Lebas.
Lovely. Thank you. Right, so I might skip that one, unless you want to see it again. But I just wanted to say thank you for Shop. Is that how you say it? You say Shop, yes? Okay, for Shop to invite me talking, and thank you for Annie for such a wonderful article in the magazine last year. We had a great moment to interview, and it's interesting because so this is really a representational of me kind of obsessively looking for a view. I get a piece obsessive like that, and always there is someone somehow recording and hoping that I would fall on the snow or something. Something would happen to me. But basically, I'm starting the lecture with. It's interesting because I tend to forget about my beginnings in photography. I tend to forget that I was not really... when you're an art student in France, well, at the time when I was an art student in France, 30-something years ago, you would go to art school, but there were no really kind of photography dark rooms or anything like that. So all your training would be very much like, well, I give you a camera, a film, and you do whatever you like with it, basically. Hope for the best. So I did all my photography apprenticeship really through assisting, meeting amazing people in a photography shop somehow, and just joining the photography club in my suburb in Paris to learn how to print and stuff like that. And so after I did my studies in Paris, I applied for to go to Poland because my grandmother was Polish, and I was really intrigued. It was in 1989 that I was actually, able to go, and I was in my 20s, and I was so naive. I mean, I don't think I would do it now, but. I just went without speaking a word of English or a word of German or a word of Polish. But, I mean, my mother taught me a bit of Polish last minute, kind of Czech type of thing like that. But it was very, and at the time when I went to Poland, it was actually quite hardcore. You had to queue to get bread and things like that. So for 20-something years old, it's just, oh, hello, what I'm doing here, basically. And so the idea was to get a scholarship. So you had a little scholarship, and when the person would give me the scholarship, I had lots of notes, banknotes, yes, lots. But of course, it didn't actually. It was totally not much money actually. And so I was really kind of intrigued by the whole thing, and I was actually attached to the art academy in Krakow, and so they gave me the possibility of accessing whatever I wanted, and I just thought, what am I going to do? And I just didn't know what to do. But then I just realized, hang on, you are in the middle of what is going to change. So I started this big project that was to try and survey or portray people in their own environment and different communities that lived in Krakow. So you had the aristocrats, you had, this is the Potocki family, which is quite a famous Polish family. And he's holding a book that shows how him as a young man and how you should look like if you're a Potocki family. So it's I was touching on weird things like that. And she was about 100 years old. So I just thought, actually, it's quite interesting because she, by the time she witnessed lots of changes, actually, 50 years of communism and of course, before that, So I went around and photographed these people. And it took me 2 years to research. And I thought about bringing back this work because I just thought, well, we talked about that with Annie, about the fact that this research really kind of, maybe there's an obsessiveness in me that want to look and want to dig in. And I'm a bit like a detective as well. So these are people who have met word of mouth, and so I just kind of carried on. So that was made between 1989 and 92. 92. 19, so I'm not very good in math, but anyway, 2 years. And then I went back to France, and I was actually nominated for a prize. So it's actually interesting because you have the Jill Todd Award here, which I've got the pleasure of, doing a little masterclass tomorrow. And that I won a prize for this. So that was the in French, moins de 30, like, yes, thank you very much. Oh God, I can't translate. I'm not very good at translating things. So under 30. So I was under 30 years old when I had this prize. So that was exhibited in the Centre National of Photographie in Paris. So that was the beginning of my little journey, if you like, in kind of thinking, oh, that's great. I can do that then. So basically, there are stories in each of them, but I'm not going to go into them because this is going to take the whole lecture. So yes, so basically, I've decided to bring, because publishing for me has been always a very, very important point, and because I'm showing also the field study book, the last book. I started self-publishing after the Royal College. I did the Royal College of Art, and I had about, so that was about quite a few years of bodies of works I could bring together. And this was the first publication. And I always remember, I don't know if you know Zelda Chito, but she has been a mama for me. I would go and see her, and she would give me lots of little advice. And I said, Zelda, I don't understand. Nobody wants to publish my work. And she said, well, just do it yourself then. So, okay, well, I'll do it myself. So I did it myself. And I've raised funding. 2003, there were no really kind of crowdfunding or anything like that. But I managed to get some free paper. The printer was in East London. I managed to get discounts. It was an amazing printer. We won the first British Book Design Award with it, so it was all worth it. And so this actually this book really brought together, gave me the chance to understand what I was doing with my work and to define it. And there was lots of subjects that interested me after the Polish portrait. That was really pure portraits, staged. And here at the Royal College of Art, I explored lots of different ideas around night, around the sleep, around reading, these kind of weird experiments that Dr. Henri Baraduc, a French scientist, who would actually try to capture the nightmare of a priest asleep. So I was fascinated by all that. So I invited people to come and sleep on my couch, on my sofa, and I gave them a good bottle of wine, and they fell asleep. And I would go with this huge Pentax 6.7, and that's really bulky and makes lots of noise. So I would take one shot, and then I would disappear. So this kind of began my fascination with the idea of sleep and the idea of what you might discover when you take a photograph of someone sleeping. You just might see something interesting. And I did this work in parallel to a series that was called Night 2. And in this series, I started photographing, experimenting with pinhole cameras. And the idea, I was always fascinated by the idea that some cameras, you should not use them in certain ways. And I wanted to break that. And I thought, yes, I'm going to use a pinhole camera at night, just because I can't, just because I'm not allowed. So I loaded the pinhole camera with film and 5.4, and I traveled around the UK and looking desperately for night without stars, and which is very difficult to find, actually. So I traveled around Cornwall, I think, and so really looking desperately for no human presence at all, only maybe some little castles and things like that. And basically, I just kind of, it's interesting because when I was at the Royal College of Art, I was together in the same year as Anna Starkey, Tom Hunter, people like that. And people were really kind of into issue-based photography. It had to be documentary, it had to be grounded onto a research like that, which I was a bit not, it was not my thing. So I had a hard time because I had to kind of justify why these were black holes of, you had to immerse yourself in these huge monumental photographs. And actually, I found, the way to save myself, it's really great to always find little quotes. Gerhard Richter said, "I believe quite simply that we have not yet gone beyond Romanticism. The paintings of that era are still a part of our sensibility." So I would kind of push that quote onto anybody who would say anything. And because I gone even worse, just using a panorama and extend the view and looking for, again, this kind of high viewpoint, looking at, I was, of course, looking at Caspar David Friedrich and placing myself on the top of mountain, looking down at this landscape. Now, the landscape I would choose would, at this time, the whole series is called Azure, and doesn't have really a notion of place. I was just interested in the notion of awe I would get when I would photograph these places. And of course, then I would start use this Noblex camera, which has a lens revolving on an axe. And for a second exposure, you need a minute. So every exposure was extended. And sometimes there would be about, an hour exposure. And so I've traveled to lots of different places, in Iceland, for example, or Finland with this camera, and using film, of course. I still use film, I'm not digital. So basically, the idea here was really kind of to record twilight. And that was what began with the pinhole photographs as well, is kind of to think about the color change, the way that the film surface cannot cope with this extension of time accumulating on the film surface, and sometimes I would actually mention the time itself, where you can see the moon, the trace of the moon. This is quite a few hours exposure in Finland. Sometimes I would start exposing before light falls, and then I would stop and I would carry on until the moon arrives. So lots of kind of waiting, and I would say it's a bit like a performance. Yes, I'm trying to kind of, get that through. Now, the second publication I've made was really much something which when I went to see my designer, I had the whole publication sussed out, basically, the whole design. And she said, "What do you need me for?" And I said, "Well, to put it together." But basically, I wanted this second book. The first book, I had lots of essays in it. It defined really my, viewpoints. But the second book was more an artist book, I would say. And you had a flip book at the end that, translated to a film and things like that. So it was a lot more immersive. And it's called Between Dog and Wolf because I started being fascinated by forests. I grew up in the south of France and in Burgundy and in a suburb of Paris, of course. You could call it a forest as well, in some ways. So in the south of France, we used to go and play in forest, and sometimes my sisters were playing a bit with me, and to make it that they left me in the dark. So we would build huts and whatever, and set fire to the whole wood, or just kids. And so I went back and photographed and tried to remember, because I left it long time ago, and I tried to remember these places where we used to play. And so I started photographing it every 3 meters to photograph what I would remember, the path. And I couldn't find it. I couldn't find any place. So I found my little lover that was still living there in the village, and he took me through the woods and took me through the path. And that was quite a revelation, because of course your memory fell drastically, and notion of scale is not the same. And so basically, these ideas about looking at this forest was sparked. The title Between Dog and Wolf is very much because it takes it from the twilight notion in French is entre chien et loup, and it's because you are kind of confused. Can you hear a dog barking, or is it a wolf making sound? And so in the Finland, when I traveled up, I would travel there because I was looking for this particular light called Kumo, and it's a light perpetual twilight in winter. So I was really interested in trying to capture that. And of course, I was always walking like the film in the snow, looking for the view. And my partner was like, well, hang on, the view is the same. The trees there is the same. No, it's not the same. But we would always end up in the kind of middle of this landscape. And of course, at some point, I heard, when I was actually filming, I was photographing this view, and I was filming as well. I was making films, moving image at the same time. And then we heard wolves. I didn't think that would happen, but it did. So luckily the exposure was ready, and I could pack up and just leave, basically, because I would be a bit nervous. So there is the idea of kind of confronting nature as well. If I talk about that, in a kind of a jokey way, in a way, I quite like the idea of kind of thinking about the animals and about what our response to the animals and to nature and what we expect from them. And here I was actually looking at, in the Black Forests, looking at legends and stories. And I found this view and this particular wood because I read about the Bruder Pauli, who actually was left to wander the forest by the monastery because he stole gold. So I was looking, I was just photographing the forest of Bruder Pauli, not thinking even much of it. But somehow this woman came with her skis, skiing through the forest. And she told us, "Are you looking for Bruder Pauli?" So that was a bit weird again. So it's kind of another weird thing. So just all these things that you counter that might build up in the picture as well. That's quite interesting. Now, this series is actually going back to my woods, to the woods where I was brought up. And again, here, there is lots of reference here in the forest. Bachelard talked about the immensity of the forest as well. There have been lots of psychological writing about the forest. And it's a forest is where you go in and you just don't know how you're going to get out of. And here I was actually quite interested in, you see the Azure series, the blue images were very open and yet, quite dark, but very open. And here I had to fight my way through to understand how technically I had to do it, because obviously I couldn't actually use my camera in the same way. So there were lots of problematic around taking these pictures. And at the same time, I really wanted to kind of get back to this feeling of being surrounded by these woods and at twilight. And so often I would photograph and leave the woods, it would be complete darkness, yes, and try to find my way around it. Now, this series took me to Japan, where I went to photograph the Mount Fuji forest, which is a forest where people would go and commit suicide. Now, it's when I had a show in Japan, the gallery asked me, "Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Can we take you somewhere?" And I read about this, and so I just, I asked to be driven to this particular place. And I had a driver, and the gallery was so nervous letting me go. I mean, I was with my partner, but so he made a special branch, little things for us to retrace our way back, because really, I mean, this is what you see here. And of course, you would actually encounter little strings areas where they might have found people's remains or things. And so it's just kind of, what interested me is that people, kind of go, and this is actually historical, that people actually go, are rejected by society, or they just go themselves to get lost in the forest as well. So there is this kind of element to it, which is something I was really interested in there. Now, exploring forest and looking at places, I'm also, there is another layer within all the works I've been doing, is looking at the ephemeral, looking at things that might happen for just a little moment in time, and how do you record this? And I was interested in photographing and filming the blue hour. So so in French we say entre chien et loup, and we say heure bleue for twilight, and which I translated to blue hour. Now, in this series, I actually went to Wiltshire. There's a bluebell forest, and I was really interested to see how the blue ray kind of changes, the intensity changes at twilight. And I recorded it, filmed it in an hour movie. So nothing happens there, only light changes. And it's interesting because I showed it in cinemas, at exhibition spaces, and people stayed. I mean, I was mesmerized because, hang on. In Paris, one guy got pissed off with my sound. He said, "This is not the forest." Okay. Well, if you like, but anyway. So it was really interesting because showing in different places, you had a different attitude towards, and I was really interested in replacing the forest in the context of a gallery space and see, I mean, I'm very impatient, so I don't know how I can't watch it. I can't stay for an hour. But, I had the editor with me, and he told me that at 4 minutes, there is a bird passing. Great. So for me, it's quite difficult. But this was the show at the V&A, the Twilight Photography in the Magic Hour, where I had the film playing together with the photographs of the Abyss series. And that was a show curated by Martin Barnes. And I have to say, this show really kind of brought me into kind of exploring lots of other things. It allowed me to really kind of push my practice further. So each frame, each photographs are about 2 meter long, and the film was actually quite small in its size, but it was filmed with HDV. And I just say that because the technology changes so much. So yeah, I'm trying to keep up with it. It's quite difficult. And these are the large images that I photographed at the same time, and these were very long exposures of the bluebells falling onto the light falling. So now you might know The Green Ray by Eric Romer, because actually the blue hour kind of really, I was thinking about the Green Ray, Jules Verne, Green Ray, when he came to Scotland, and he kind of, I don't know if he observed it really in Staffa caves. Apparently, there is a story that the green wave was observed by a woman who was with her lover there, and it might be that I can't remember the story actually. It might be that they stayed together afterwards. So Eric Romer based his film onto the Jules Verne Green Ray, and it's a story of this woman who is single, and she goes on a holiday in the south of France, and she's miserable, and it is very slow, and then she met this man, lovely, and they see the Green Ray. I've never seen it actually, but anyway. And so basically, in parallel to what I was doing with Between Dog and Wolf, I was offered to go on residency in Firmin Woods Contemporary Art in the Midlands. And it was very interesting because these woods had nothing to do with what I was, kind of used to, these lavish, big places. They were small woods. And so they wanted me to do work around the area. And what I did, I work a lot with maps. So in a map, I just realized actually there were lots of crisscrossing lanes in the woods. And I just wondered, what does it mean? And researching, I found that Norman the Conqueror, coming around the Rockingham woods, messed up the whole layout for hunting purposes. So basically, now you've got these alleys. And in this particular wood, you have lots of huts where you climb up to and you observe animals. So I decided to photograph from the top of these huts, to shoot from there. Not, shooting, but shooting with my camera. And basically here, it kind of positioned me really into the idea of waiting, the idea of kind of looking, and the idea of expectation as well. What are you going to see? Are you going to see an animal or not? So again, there is a kind of quite strong sense of, of the performance as well, because you have to climb up and then you can't move because the whole thing moves. If you move, the camera is shaking. So it's kind of a bit crazy. And so each side of the hut, I would actually photograph the four sides, religiously, going, walking, finding a hut, photograph the four sides. And of course, these were made at twilight sometime. And so by the time I turned my camera to the fourth side, it was completely dark. And at the same time, I was making this work because I walked a lot. And I came across this thing, lots of feathers on the floor that resembled a nest. But no, it was not a nest. It was actually a sparrowhawk that eats a pigeon. I thought it was a fox. And then, of course, I showed the pictures to someone at the at the Natural History Museum in London, and they said, well, actually, it's not. It's usually a big bird or a sparrowhawk that would eat. And it kind of interested me because coming from the city, now I live in the city, and of course you look at this bird kill and you just kind of wonder. So there's a wonderment always, yes, kind of wondering what is happening here. So it's, and the title Animalism is very much looking at animals' behaviors and kind of thinking, okay, well, what does it mean for me? How do I feel about that? So it's a kind of questioning all of that, really. I was invited by the Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature in Paris to, they commissioned me to go to thinking about how to look at animals. I went to Belleval. It's a park where people would go and learn how to hunt. And they are really serious about that. Hunting has to be done in the proper way. So basically, I went to this park, and then somehow I was not allowed to walk. I was not allowed to. I had a hunter with me who would actually come, and when he would post me somewhere, and say, "Are you happy here?" Okay, well, maybe. And then he would go and hunt, and then come back when I finished photographing, shooting as well. And he would come back and fetch me, and that was not really working at all, actually. So I said, look, is there any way? I mean, it took such a long time for me to get the right to get the possibility to get the car in and to find a view, because I was so restricted. So I found a view. And obsessively, I went back to the view and photographed it, winter, summer, all the seasons, anytime, all the time. I would just go. And it was really quite a dark place. It was really lots of stags, lots of white bulls. The whole place is completely managed. So that's how I began really being interested in what are we doing with our landscape and managing for animals that are enclosed in these places. why. And so all of that kind of made me, so this is how the work was displayed at the Musée de la Chasse et de la Nature. So I did lots of, there were about 24 prints that were, presented in this little drawing cabinet, a bit like they have this furniture that display quite interesting things there. And it was shown again at Beaux-Arts, a show that was curated by Liz Wells, Sense of Place. And I represented France, which is quite interesting because I live here. I get away with things like that. And at the same time, I did this film. I'm not showing it to you, sorry, but that, in this place, they had lots of taxidermy. And I saw this big buffalo. When I came in the office, it was standing there, huge thing. I said, oh, hello. And then I just thought, oh my God, this is so fascinating. And the administrator was completely oblivious. She said, yeah, it's a good one. So I started filming it because filming it, nothing happens, of course. But you just kind of expect, you're looking at the eye is definitely looking at you. So there is again an expectation here. So it's only 1.5 minutes, but you expect something to happen. Sorry, I'm not going to show it to you. And all that took me to Croatia, where I had a show first time, I think it was in 2007. And in Croatia, I just realized, actually, I've been talking about animals and wilderness and this vast landscape. And actually, Croatia has amazing national parks, and they do have bears and wolves roaming around and lynx freely in the national park, which I believe. So I just, I could actually kind of start making work there and see how I feel actually walking across the forest with this kind of animals roaming behind me or in front of me. And so in this particular place, so I chose Risnjak National Park, which is a park which is really close to the Slovenian border. It's at the Slovenian border as well. And it has a very interesting climate. And this is the Kupa River, which has a quite interesting, phenomenon that has the fog going in and out. So it's a source. I forgot to say it's a source. It's really important because you don't see the beginning of it. And it has this very interesting fog formation, but also there are lynx that have been witnessed in this area. So when I was filming in this gorge, I had to film at night and make my way back to the car. It was always an hour walk at night with knowing that there are bears and wolves lingering around and lynx and things like that. And actually the films I managed to capture some sound of something weird happening. I can't tell what it is, but, something definitely is happening. But because at twilight, of course, things are happening because, there's lots of kind of fight to get to your house and to get to your nest or to get to wherever you need to do or to eat and stuff like that. So I actually filmed the same view as well in the winter. So I went back to kind of have the sound as well, to see, what was the difference. And actually, when I was shooting here, so that was at the top of the... So again, it was really interesting because I researched that park quite extensively and walking around. And when I talked to the national park, they said, well, don't worry about the bears. Because I said, well, what do I do if I see a bear? Don't worry about them. They will not attack you. They won't do anything. But then when I went to the Museum of Hunting in Zagreb to research a bit, the guy was like, well, no, you have to be very careful. We have to kill the bears. There are too many bears. So it was a complete two different, totally. And then I understood that when I was walking, I found corn and on the floor and then an enclosure with meat in it. I just thought, are they feeding animals, actually? So this is not wilderness. And then I met with a biologist who told me all about the national park. So that was a bit of a grim situation, really. So what they do is that they encourage the animals to come close to visitors, for visitors to see them. So it's a kind of open zoo, if you like, yes. So it's a bit dodgy. But I saw a group of wolves when I was shooting. So that was super early in the morning. And I had the film camera on one side, as usual, the still camera on the other side. And I was walking in between, and then I saw these wolves crossing the landscape. And I froze. I just saw, the person who was with me was in the car sleeping, so a bit useless. So it's kind of, again, well, this is my own, and this is not a 4x4, these are bear's tracks, and they're actually quite fresh. So I would kind of follow bear tracks and see, where that took me. To kind of a bit of a dare type of thing. Yeah, so I dare you. It's a bit of a dangerous situation, really. But and at the same time, walking, what do? Then you photograph flora, and the flora in Risniak is extremely rich because of the climate. And this is what began. My story with the natural history, actually. This is the whole series here. Looking close up, and I was kind of thinking about when I was a child, and when the school would take us onto visits in the forest, and where we would actually study. So I call them histoire naturelle, because actually very much studying the floor, studying little things, and looking at things that are really there. And a bone, of course, of a cow. That was left by the national park to feed the wolves, actually. Interesting, huh? So you find things like that. So when I went to the hunting museum in Zagreb, I actually found this display of taxidermy, which I started photographing. Because again, here it kind of gives you an idea about what we're expecting, and also sometimes the displays kind of bring animals together that shouldn't really be brought together. So there is a kind of quite interesting conversation here to have with this series of images. So this is actually when I had the show with this work at the Contemporary Art Museum in Rijeka. We had a lavish, huge space, and so I could show 2 or 3 films and lots of work. And I was in conversation with another Croatian artist, Sofia Silvia, who actually worked on the Brioni Island in Croatia, which was the Tito Island, where Tito kept all his zoo and taxidermy and things like that, and where he invited people to come and stay, actually, as well. So we had a very nice show conversation looking at what it is to look when we look at the landscape and wilderness and the environment and climate change and all these things that began within these works. So now this is the biggie. And this is actually, it's interesting because when I, Birgit Arends, who used to be the curator at the Naturist Museum, knew what I was doing, and she saw the work in Croatia and other stuff. And she told me about this collection of glass plates at the museum they had that covered photographs of the British Isles, from the 1910 to 1930s. And there were glass plates like that with boxes, very badly archived on the top of filing cabinets in a heated area. So when I saw the collection, the Mark Spencer, who was actually the herbarium senior curator, took me there, and I said, Mark, would you mind changing moving the collection to a better place, like a cooler place? Because they were really deteriorating. So he brought them down, and I started looking, and what I found was images, glass plates of people in the woods or plants or things like that. And I just wondered, so who took these pictures? Basically, there were no names to them. And one day I found a glass plate with engraved on it E.J. Salisbury, so Edward James Salisbury. And so Mark jumped on his seat and he said, oh, this is such an important ecologist and botanist. and he was head of Kew Gardens during the Second World War and a bit after. So he rebuilt Kew Garden. And he was a researcher, and he loved counting seeds and researching, how plants grow in different type of soil situation and things like that. So he was really doing lots of research. And this is actually his notebook, which is actually at the Kew Gardens archive, library and archives. And when I saw this the first time, I just thought, God, I don't understand this thing. So Mark came with me to really try to decipher the collection. And so this is him on the right-hand side. And on the left, you have fellow botanists as well, ecologists, observing, digging, and getting their hands dirty, looking. Now, I found recently at the British Ecological Society this series, and it's interesting because I was thinking of that because I know quite a few photographers who climb on ladders to take photographs of landscapes. So, and I saw recently somebody climbing on a ladder on the top of a van as well. How high do you need to go? So, I just thought this is my little, I have vertigo, so you will not see me on the top of a ladder to take a photograph. But I just thought that was amazing. And these were people that were researching the landscape in Norfolk. So there is a reason why they climb on a ladder, because Norfolk landscape is very flat. So you need to climb on a ladder. In Scotland, it's great. I could just climb on a little rock and I could see the whole view. That was great. And so began the whole, we got a big grant from the Gulbenkian Foundation that allowed me to research for a year and to get a botanist that would actually come and travel with me to Scotland and to Blakeney. And we would research together. So this is typical, yes. We would never walk very far because it was impossible. We would stop and observe a little mini area for hours. And then I would get the chance to probably photograph at some point. But the places I decided, so I could have decided to photograph in Wales, to travel to Wales, to retrace, because that was the idea, to retrace 90 years later what would have happened to this landscape. So that was my idea, kind of research with the help of scientists as well. And okay, I'm going to say it. Arochard. This is Arochard. Sorry, I really can't say it. So I will say Arochard. And Arochard is very interesting because, as Annie knows, it's basically... Oh, can I use this thing? Yes, so basically the area I was photographing began with this area, the car park there, and then I walked along here to find the views. So I was looking for Salisbury's views in the landscape and trying to attempt to rephotograph them. And I was, for example, this view here on the top. So you see the way that the glass plates is very, it's very blocked. You don't see the mountain in the back. So Mark allowed me to take the glass plates in my dark room and to print from them. That's unheard of. Don't ask any archives to ask you to do that, but he was lovely. It just kind of, so here, for example, so we are on the Loch Long in Arochard, and we are looking towards the Loch, and he was photographing this particular plant here, the Sciopus maritimus. When I went back, it's not there. So what happened to the landscape? So, of course, you can't. I've learned from scientists, artists always have funny ideas to invent stories. I quite like inventing stories. But I was always readdressed by the scientists, said, you cannot say that. You just can't say that. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so I had to really... I found out just recently what happened to this landscape, actually, through, giving lectures, and another scientist came up with his own theory. And actually, the plant that is at the bottom here only grows in a kind of salty, mixed soft water. And now there's a new road that was built, I can't remember when it was built exactly, but the road was moved, so it means that the water course had moved as well. So you would not find the same habitat now anymore in this particular area. And also, there are other agencies as well. When I went once to Haroshar, there were lots. It was after flood, low tide, and you had lots of plastic and detritus. I was shocked to see that, actually. And so they bring diggers to dig the plastic, to dig the ground. So that removed the roots as well. So all the landscape has changed. So when you begin like that, you just kind of say, okay, well, how far is that going to go? So this is me proving to the botanist I had the right view, yes, because he was always a bit kind of wondering, are you sure you've got the right space? And I said, yes, placing the picture on the top. And you see what happened to this landscape as well. So it's interesting, when I came to Scotland, I read Charles Roran book on Scotland that really talked to me about the history, the complex history of the Scottish landscape, because everybody said to me before, even knowing about the Scottish landscape, oh, you should go and photograph this wilderness. Wilderness. Well, the Scottish landscape is not as wild because it has been manufactured completely from start to finish by history. And lots of things happen to it. For example, this tree here, this Christmas tree, it's interesting, huh? But that might be a bird seeding the tree, bringing a seed in the ground, and just the tree grows there. But just have a look at what the mountain looks like, yes, in 1928. So that was really barren. And it just happened that the Forestry Commission bought the land in the 70s, and they started growing trees, fir trees, to do what? Commerce, yes? So, and at the same time, removing, you see that on the right-hand side is all fir trees. And on the left, you have still ancient woods, yes, where I could find interesting. Now, here, I blow this, because in the darkroom, I was a bit excited to find the steamboat. Yes, to reveal the steamboats. And of course, when I was looking at this, particular plant here, which is Immunophyllum wilsoni. So this is what we are looking at here is the moss. And I found, exactly, I was walking around this boulder. I couldn't find it. I was walking around this boulder by chance, and here it was looking at me. So I photographed the boulder as well. So there is a systematic that started to happen in my way of photographing, that I would actually adopt the same way than Salisbury, photograph the habitat, the landscape, and close up the species as well. So this is, and here I would then start to incorporate text, because Salisbury wrote quite a few books on ecology and botany, and usually they would be for educational purpose. So for each species, I would find the equivalent in Salisbury's book and the way that he described the plant. And then the top, it's taken from the Clive A. Stay's book on New Flora of the British Isles, which is actually the Bible for botanists, for people to actually find where species live and how to identify them. And when I was at the Naturalist Museum, in the offices, they were always, where is Stace, where is Stace? So I just, well, this is Stace. So it's a totally hermetic text. I don't understand anything of it, but I just found it really interesting because you have Salisbury text, which is very poetic, old English, I love it. But then you have this really, but it's quite naughty as well, the top text sometimes. I was reading things, a bit pornographic sometimes. And now we are in Aviemore, so this is what I would find, and the way is Aviemore. And what I find, so this is what Salisbury would actually written about Rothimercus. And Rothimercus is very interesting because it's not like Haroshar at all. You have lots of Scotch spines there. The Forestry Commission now has bought, since I started the research, has bought quite a lot of it. So it might change politically. What's going to happen to it, I don't know. But they said to me, nothing much will happen. It will stay as much as they can. So this was the breakthrough image where we had discussions because, of course, working with the scientists, we had often discussions about what we are looking at, how we are looking at things in the landscape. And here he would actually explain to me, because I was desperately looking for this big tree there. And of course, the national parks, the Rothier-Mercus people said to me, well, you will never find it. Are you joking? And actually, I found a view, not necessarily thinking about this tree, but then when Mark saw this picture, said, well, it could as well be this tree, because you see that these are the youngest trees around. And so he explained to me, dissected what I was looking at, the habitat of the, of the trees and what could have had happened to the landscape. There is something I began to do as well, is to use coordinates for all the pictures, because I had so much trouble finding Salisbury's views that I bought myself a GPS and photographed each views with a GPS and recorded the coordinates, so that if you want, you can go back and look at this landscape in 100 years' time. So that was the idea. And I would go back to certain places and re-photograph somehow. It's amazing how your views tend to, you have the same frame in your head to see how things were progressing. Because, for example, for this view, this is really, I've been kind of talking about the view a lot. The word view, it's there. It's what is the best view? His view, my view. I was getting really confused about that, actually. So I quite like this first view I found of this landscape, which you can see the mountain range there at the back, and you can see the juniper invasion as well. Not much grazing by the deers there. And then another view of it. So this is actually another year passed, and I found another view. Maybe that might be this view. And then I found the right view. I think this is the right view, but anyway. So it might not be the right view. So again, there is the idea, I had really struggled with this because I was always kind of thinking, okay, well, what am I doing as an artist? I'm walking on somebody's steps, and he's photographed this landscape as a scientist, not interested in the view, not interested in the picturesque, if you like. His glass plates, okay, this is a nice one, but all the others are dire. But like Corbin Forest, I had these two glass plates lodged in the Scottish landscape glass plates that were really, you couldn't see what was in them. And I had to print them and burn to see that it was Corbin. And I don't know if you know Corbin, but Corbin was like that, yes. And that was in 1695. There were a big storm and the whole estate was covered by sand and the farms. So they decided to kind of start afforesting the dunes, means planting trees to stop the dunes moving. Now, there is a quite interesting twist in that, is that I did lots of research with the Forestry Commission there. I walked with a ranger, a lovely guy who walked with me the whole day, told me the whole story of the place. And he gave me maps of progressive plantation and what kind of trees would be planted. And it just works. But now, and that was just before the Scottish independence referendum. So that was really quite dodgy because, of course, it depends, his position would change, or the position of the forest would change if, politically, who is going to be at the head of Natural Scotland or the Forestry Commission Scotland, who is going to decide what. Because at the time when I met him, the guy that was head of the office wanted him to remove anything that was growing on the top of the dunes to avoid, to start for the dunes to be moving again, because that was a moving landscape. And we all know about the Trump golf course that kind of completely damaged the whole another moving dune system. So there were a wish to kind of go back to how it was to get the dunes moving. Now, this is actually very interesting. When I did this whole project, I came across amazing collections of photographs. This is the Forestry Commission Scotland collection of photographs that were in, again, filing cabinets very badly. And actually, the woman she said to me, okay, you take them with you. She wanted me to keep the bloody collection. So what I did, I just re-archived them, but bring them back to them. I said, you have to donate to St. Andrews University or anybody that would be interested to research this collection. These are photographs taken by foresters when the dunes were just planted. So there are annotations, and it's a bit of a mess, but I was also researching the collection by Robert Moyes Adams at St. Andrews University, because he was an illustrator himself, and he was part of the Alpine Society, the Scottish Alpine Society as well. So he was actually very good at photographing the landscape and kind of giving you a topographic map of the landscape. So through him, I could then find the places that Salisbury might have photographed or be interested in. But of course, this landscape now is changing as well, because the sea is rising, but then you have to be careful what you say with that, because sea is rising in some areas in Scotland and receding in other areas, which is something I didn't know, but I've learned from scientists. And so I've made an installation for House Marseille when I had the show 2 years ago, where I filmed each area, like kind of giving you an area of looking above, looking at the sea, looking at above the forest, and two views of the dunes itself. And so I'll show you. So this is so you would be able to walk around, and then you had the sound of, so I'm going to try to do that. So it's not a good rendition of it. So the sound is actually the lovely forester who actually agreed for me to record him, talk about the dune history, and tell us all about the dunes. So you have his voice there. And it was amazing. So each frame moves for 360 degrees very slowly, and sometimes stops, look, and move again. So there is a kind of permanent movement. So it's supposed to be immersive. Now, the other area I actually looked at, because then I just realized actually this is a very important area. This is all where it all began in terms of ecology, because Salisbury was friendly with Tansley, Arthur Tansley, who was an ecologist, about the same age than Salisbury, a bit older, and Oliver, who wrote also a book with Salisbury. So this is Oliver, and Oliver, so the British Ecological Society has this collection of photographs, was shooting with Panorama. So I was really happy with that, because actually, this is me. So basically, through his photographs again, I could really kind of identify the place. So this is in Blakeney, and Blakeney was a source of research for UCL that would go on trips with students, and Oliver and Salisbury wrote a book on Blakeney as well, observing the place, and making comparison photographs as well, 1910, 1914, because it's also a moving dune system, and the coast is changing, of course, and the hook of Blakeney has moved about 4 miles. Inwards. So it's actually quite interesting, because you have such a change. And of course, I got a bit obsessed. You see, that's a camera. So I went to the British Ecological Society looking only for the camera. So any photographs that he was standing, this is the camera. So this was a box panorama camera. So just to tell you, Salisbury was still carrying his glass plates when Oliver was carrying a lovely little box camera with, film. Anyway, so these are, the photographs I took in Blakeney. And again, sometimes I would find the view at twilight. And the problem I've had with Blakeney was that it was sunny all the time. So I was a bit not happy because I don't like to shoot in the sun. So I had to wait and lots of waiting. And you see, it's interesting because here you've got the shoe. Yes, in the corner there. So there were lots of debates about this shoe. Is the shoe for the scale? Is it a mistake? And I think it's for the scale. I mean, this is my own theory. I definitely think it's for the scale. Because sometimes you would have little piece of wood and things like that. So it's so here again, you've got the view and the close-ups. And now, I got so frustrated with this project sometimes that I had to kind of go back to my studio and do something for myself because I felt that I was always kind of walking on the shadow of someone. And actually, Salisbury did all these series of photographs of portraits of plants. And I just thought, oh, plant portraits, that's great. I'm going to do some plant portraits. And it just happened that he wrote this book on weeds and aliens. And it's interesting because I read lots of stuff about weeds and aliens when I came up to Scotland, and about rhododendrons and things like that, the invasion of rhododendrons. You know how by beautifying our gardens and importing so many lovely little plants from Asia, now we have a huge problem because these plants are invasive. But of course, so thinking about knotweed, yes, knotweed is a culprit. But when I was talking to Charles Warren about that, when does a plant become native? How long do we give it until it becomes native? Why are we do we desperately want to go back to how it was before? All of these questionings is actually quite interesting to think about that and think about what is your own positioning. I mean, I am not a native. I've been here 24 years. Huh? So, of course, I can't resist then to think about it myself, in my own situation. But here, so I found the knotweed and I placed it on the color paper and changed the filtration in the enlarger. And because I'm a bit nerdy, so I had to make an Excel sheet and write all the filtration on the Excel sheet. I mean, that's really nerdy. I get a bit obsessed like that. But, I found the knotweed, and then you've got the Russian vine as well, which is this beautiful plant. However, it kind of grows on the top of a lamppost. And then, of course, I would find the plant and at the same time have the possibility to make my own herbarium. So I went to learn how to do a herbarium at the Naturalist Museum as well. They showed me how to do that. So I have my own herbarium. And with this plant, we actually blew it on a very large scale in the museum at Ars Marseille. They have this kind of lavish red room. So we decided to enlarge it to this huge prince stuck on a wall. And this is actually, I was commissioned by the FT magazine to do a story on London. And actually, I found that there is this London rocket that also had a very interesting story that reappeared during London bombing during the World War II. And somehow you can only find it near my studio in South London. So very handy. And that's it. Perfect. This is the book. We have to go, don't we? Oh, okay.
Wow, that was quite a journey. I think we'll just open it up to the floor because we don't have much time, but I know some of you will be keen to get some questions in. So can I just open it up and just see who would like to pose any questions to Christelle?
It's a Noblex. Noblex, yes. They've stopped being manufactured by, they were manufactured in Germany, in Dresden, and they stopped making them maybe, 7, 8 years ago or something like that? So I have 3 of them that we keep on repairing. There's lots of problem with them, but I don't know. I just, yes, I love the object. But now you can find them on eBay, but you have to be careful when you buy them because there's lots of problem with them. I wouldn't buy one, frankly. I wouldn't be bothered.
All right. I know there's mics, so if anybody wants to ask a question, I could just say we could get the mics to you. Any further questions? Yes, it's Wendy, yeah.
Thanks very much for a great talk. Really lovely to see the work. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with the archive. You started to talk about that when you started to show your really beautiful sort of series, I think, on weeds. Was it Weeds and Aliens?
Weeds and Aliens,
yeah.
Yes.
It's great. And I'm sure a lot of other people who've worked with archives can relate to that kind of frustration. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I think that it's interesting because it's the first time I really kind of worked with archived. And at first you are faced with all this stuff and you just, where do you begin? Basically, you just look at things, and Mark was pointing out lots of things to me, and I was a bit puzzled. What am I looking at? Why am I looking at it? And of course, when I found the name of Salisbury, that started a kind of quite nice conversation, actually. Even so, I was a bit disappointed because I quite liked the idea of a non-archive. But there were lots of kind of problematic around what is my position as an artist and what do I do with it? How do I carry this further, and how do I use it? And so this is always very problematic, I think, because you are touching photographs. Here what was good is that I had quite early on the scientists working with me and guiding me through what I was looking at. So it was not just me alone kind of trying to understand what I was looking at and trying to make up an idea of how I could take it forward. And there I had an agenda quite early on as well to rephotograph the landscape, so there was something there. And when I looked at the Kew Gardens, because Salisbury had about 30 boxes of papers and notes and things like that at Kew as well, which I went through every bits and paper. I mean, he kept jokes as well. He had little... No, so he cut people's signature. So he had a collection of these as well. So I went through the whole thing because I was desperate to see any photographic evidence. Couldn't find anything. All about his research. So photography was really a kind of side work. He came from a large family of 7 or 8. He had seven brothers and sisters, and they were all kind of scientists, architects, draughtswomen, botany, and they had a dark room in the house. So that's how I know that he became familiar with photography. But just to go back to your question, it's a huge landmine because it's a huge it's a huge source of conflict, I would say, because I came to the first time I came to see when Duncan Forbes was curator. He invited me to come and see the archive here at the museum, and he wanted me to look at John Muir Wood, and which I did. And at the same time, it was just when I began working with Salisbury, and I found quite interesting things about Muir Wood. But this is something that I didn't pursue further because I was so busy with Salisbury already to understand what I was doing with that, so I didn't actually carry on with John Muir. But then I was interested on the archive I could find that would give me clues and ideas about what I was looking at. And now I'm looking at the British Ecological Society archive because there is some reasons for me to look at it.
Can we just get the mic?
Any question?
Yeah, great.
Why did you decide to make your work in England and not France?
Why? Why? I wonder. Well, I did. No, I did. I did the whole lots of forests work in France, the Museum of Hunting and Nature work. So I did quite a lot of work in France. I'm a traveler, so I quite like walking and I quite like exploring. So I don't really think about borders. I don't like to think about borders, actually. Do you know when I was in Poland the first time, I remember taking the train from Paris to Krakow and having to show my passport to scary the Eastern German police was really, really scary. And I was joking. I was joking. I was like, oh, hello, trying to interact. And, well, yes, borders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good answer to an Irish question.
Well,
Barry, did you say Belfast? Was your question in relation to
No, the question was related to why you made your work in
yes,
Yeah.
UK or England.
yes.
Opposed to
Well, this is really because yes, but this is really because the archive is in London, so so that kind of he actually there is an area which I would like to explore in France because UCL traveled to the coast in France to compare research because of course researchers don't have borders, they want to see what's happening. And I did some work in Ameland in Holland when I had the show there, and there was so many close relationship between scientists in Norfolk, in Corbin and in Ameland because they have the same landscape. And so they have different planting strategies are shared through science. So this is what is a bit scary now. But, you know, what's going to happen to all this kind of shared knowledge? And I hope that will carry on because, now we can travel and have a look without borders. Yeah.
so it's scientific as well as art.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody else? I know Robin's looking at his watch, thinking, yes, it's getting close. And we'll have time, I think, just for a few minutes, if anybody wants to pick up a copy of studies that Crystal mentioned, that the interview with Annie was featured in. So we'll maybe just keep a little bit of time for that. And I think there's a couple of your books. Again, people really want to have the opportunity of purchasing that before they leave. So can I just say on behalf really of SHOP and everybody involved with the National Galleries and the Jill Todd Award that this has been a real pleasure.
It has been a pleasure for me
too. A round of applause.
Thank you.